Haven't even got the right mic selected.
It's going to be one of those shows. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk. Back again with you guys and girls for another episode of what is the Arsenal Raw Reaction Show. Joining you the morning after Arsenal's 2-2. Shouldn't have been saying that. Should have been saying 2-0. 2-2 draw with Aston Villa. A very, very frustrating end to yesterday's game and very sour feeling in the thoughts and minds of supporters today. It's just gutting, really, isn't it? To see Arsenal have a 2-0 lead against, one of the tougher sides in the Premier League, a side that Arsenal last season dropped 6 points to, and had the opportunity to completely flip that round this season. Good win away from home at Villa Park, and it looks like we're on the way to another 2-0 win against Villa this season. And very, very humbling. Very tough to take in the second half, and with everything that happened, we're going to talk about it. I'm going to take some of your questions in the chat box. It's not going to be a post game phone in today. I'll be very honest with you. I don't have the energy for it. I really don't, and I'm going to enjoy my day off today and take. And certainly take Sunday away from football, I think, after this morning show, and go enjoy the extra stuff that life has to offer outside of what is ultimately just a game at the end of the day. But good morning to those joining us in the chat box. Thank you so much for doing so. Martin, Christopher, Todd, Brad, Rich, Steve. We've got Paul, Rath, Knowledge, Tabani, Blackshine, Maximius. We've got Colin and A1, Gaza. We've got Mike. We've got Lars. Plenty more of you guys and girls as well. Thank you for tuning in. Owen says, do a poll for that bloody handball. Amazing amount of disagreement over what was such a simple call. I can do that if you want. Quite funny. See how many people want to say that they're wrong about something. Was it handball? It's just a simple question. We'll come back to that poll in the start of part 2. Right, let's jump to today's slide, shall we? Do drop a like. I'm not going to force you. I'm not expecting much. It's not a great morning, so I don't blame you if you don't want to. But if you would, that would be great. 2 points dropped. It is quite simple. The headline at full time from yesterday's game. It was a performance that deserved, in the end, I still think more than what we got. And defensively, obviously, the 2 goals that we conceded can be looked at with a significant amount of scrutiny. And I do empathise with what Mikel Arteta said at full time in the press conference after the game. The players that we've got available, the fact that we're kind of having to play the same teams, barring, 1 or 2 changes max. And, this is another game in 3 days. We've had 3 games in 6. We've had 4 games in, less than... 11 days, 4 games, go back 3 more days. It's 5 games in 2 weeks. It's the schedule at this time for Arsenal with the level of injury that we are facing with 7 players currently out. Of course, many of whom are key starting figures in this team, Ben White and Calafiori, and of course, Bukayo Saka being the big one amongst others as well. It's causing significant strain on the team. So, very frustrating indeed. And in the end, the performance, there's certainly mistakes there, but overall, I was actually quite pleased with how we played the game, and we'll come to those mistakes. But I think in the end, we deserved way more than we ended up getting. Sadly, the lineup. I know there's an obvious, glaring kind of question mark in this lineup, but I really didn't foresee, if Saliba was to be out, any other option. I think it's really easy, isn't it, to turn around and say, well, you've got it's the poll say, what is handball? What is handball? Let me end that poll. I'll do another one. What is handball? Is the question we want to ask. Was it handball is the actual question I should be asking. There you go. It's the philosophical question of what is handball. The lineup Partey at right back. I know that people said, Kivior's on the bench, or Tierney's on the bench, or Kukure's on the bench, but Kivior in his last 2 starts for Arsenal, he's made a big mistake that's cost us a goal against Crystal Palace. He's made a mistake that's cost us a goal against Fulham. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I'm going to feel any more secure defensively against one of the best attack sides in the league with Kivior in over Partey. I know our record's not great with Partey playing there, but our record's not great with the other options either, to be honest. So I genuinely don't think that we can sit here categorically and say, well, if we didn't play Partey at right back, we win this game. The record is bad, but do you know what else is bad? The number of right backs that we got injured, and now the number of centre halves we've got injured as well. Ben White, Tomiyasu, Saliba, Calafiori, all out. It's a huge amount of talent, a huge amount of investment that's missing from this squad. And unfortunately, that's ridiculous. And for those that think, and turn around and say injuries are part and parcel of the game, sure, they are. But when you've got them to this volume, when you've got them to this degree, I'm sorry. But it's going to have an impact. To turn around and say it should not be having any impact at all, that you have to try and cope with that and deal with the number of injuries we've got, I'm sorry, but no, it doesn't work that way. When you've got 3 of your right-sided players out, it's going to have an impact. It's going to have a problem. It's going to have an effect on how competitive you are, on the level of quality that you have. So stop making excuses for the critics. It is, without a doubt, going to have an impact. And I'm not going to shy away from asking those difficult questions. I asked Arteta myself. It's 1 Premier League win in 6 that we've had this season with Partey starting at right back. He didn't enjoy the question. I think I must have gone through about 5 different drafts in my head about how to ask the question. Because the thing is, it's not just as simple as, why didn't you play this player at right back? Or why didn't you play somebody else? Or the record's so bad, so why do this? Because you're just going to get a response back that's, well, are you a coach kind of thing? That was what I was expecting. And when you're asking these questions, you kind of have to think about what the answer might be. So I wanted to ask the question in a way which was, how damaging is it losing players from their natural positions, making reference to our record with Partey at right back? And even then, even in what I felt was one of the kindest ways I could have put forward the question about Partey at right back that I honestly think needed to be asked, he still wasn't having any of it. So that's that in that regard. But let's talk about the game. Let's talk about what we saw on the day. Martinelli was absolutely on it yesterday. I thought it was one of his best performances in an Arsenal shirt this season. On the right-hand side, really, really positive. Very good finish. Very good game overall. It was a constant problem for Martin, and then Digne as well. And was very impressed with Martinelli's performance. And it was definitely encouraging. And for a player that's played an immense amount of football, as have everybody else in this team over the last however many weeks, it was very, very important to get this type of performance from Martinelli. And we got that. The desire to get on the end of that chance that Trossard puts into the box was very good. And it was nice to see Emi Martinez flap at the ball, because let's be all honest, we can't stand that guy. And then Havertz, of course, goes on to score in the second half. Another brilliant cross from Leandro Trossard. We'll talk about him more specifically in a second. But Havertz, of course, who's been on the end of a ridiculous amount of criticism from some very small-minded and horrendously built people. And it was good to see him get the goal. And there was a real cheer and a real kind of... there was a real sense of support and happiness inside the ground for Havertz when he got that goal. I mean, Peter Majuzzi, who's the stadium announcer, really goes for it with the guy when it was announced over the tannoy for the fans to kind of shout back his name. You could tell it was a real kind of show of support for Havertz. And it was a really good finish. He gets, obviously, Martinez gets another touch on it, but the control on the volley was so good that it was always going to beat him. So yeah, it was very, very, very frustrating indeed that those 2 goals ended up being unfortunately kind of wiped out. I mean, the first goal we'll talk about, but just quickly, Leandro Trossard, brilliant man of the match performance from him. There's been games where we've kind of talked about the frustrations of Trossard, the frustrations where he doesn't necessarily give enough when he starts games. This was not one of those games. This was an excellent performance by Leandro Trossard. The left-footed crossing, considering he's a right-footed player, was startlingly good. The accuracy on the second cross, the dynamism he showed during the game, so unlucky at the end not to win it himself. There was a brilliant move towards the end of the game where kind of it looks like he's going to take a touch inside and then swivels to go left, completely bamboozles the Aston Villa defence, and we nearly get a chance out of that as well. Really, really strong performance, and it was good to see him step up. But we need to talk about the goals we conceded, first of all, of course. Out of nothing, really. Aston Villa get the opportunity to get back into the game pretty soon after our second goal. So frustrating. This is where the Thomas Partey at right back thing obviously comes into the conversation. It wasn't a good performance from Partey. And I don't like what I'm seeing online from people that are saying we shouldn't be making excuses for Arteta. I'm making excuses for Partey's performance here. Is he a right back naturally? No, he's not. But it doesn't mean that you can forego basic defensive responsibilities. It happened not just in these two moments where we conceded. The throw-in in the first half, where he almost gifts a chance to Ollie Watkins to give Villa the lead. Against in the midweek game against Spurs, the defensive security, even in midfield, was off during that game. In fact, their goal, their chances come from Partey just kind of allowing players to drive at him. And in this game, he's not out quick enough to the cross. Merino is described as lazy by Paul Merson. I think it's harsh, to be honest. I just think it's a really good finish from Tielemans here. And actually, the defensive side of things is like, why is it Merino in this position in the box that's dealing with this? And the defenders, obviously, you've got to have a little bit of a question mark as well. But Partey has to stop. We have to talk about the stopping of the cross. That's the main issue in this moment. It's why isn't this happening? Robert says, he points out saying Partey gave the ball away in their half, which sloppy pass then leads to the goal. And of course, then this is just unforgivable defending. Utterly unforgivable defending. To lose your man like this and let the most dangerous player in the Aston Villa side run into this position unchallenged is so it's just so bad. And some people have suggested that we should have made some changes to kind of shore up the defense after we went 2-0 up, but we had the momentum at this point. We're pushing forwards. It could be looking like we're going to go and get a third. We're not really suspecting an Aston Villa kind of sucker punch at this stage. It doesn't look on at all. But it's really frustrating. I mean, the amount of heat that Merino's getting, a guy that's been at the club for a few months and has spent the majority of the season and the start of the season, pre-season, injured, compared to Partey, I think is nuts from some people. Absolutely nuts. This is an experienced 30-plus-year-old player. Plays in defensive midfield, so it's not like he's not a defensive player. And the basic defensive duties here are just foregone. Absolutely foregone. But Arsenal nearly win it at the end of the game. And they have a few chances to win it, of course, to be able to do that. But it's handball. I don't know what you're seeing. I don't know what anyone is thinking when they try and justify this as this goal should apparently stand. For those that think it comes off his chest and then onto his arm, you're still wrong. Because it still touches his arm, even if in this wacky world, some people see a touch on the stomach first. It's so obviously handball. It's so obviously not a goal. And I never, ever, ever want to see in a game of football a goal being scored where the last touch comes off your hand. 41% of the people that have voted on this poll believe it's not handball. What on earth? Like, I get optimism. I get wanting to try and see the good and try and see the moment. I really do. But it's so obvious. I don't like that I've even included this still image because it's not the still images that you need to look at. It's the video. The videos from both angles clearly show it's the ball. And people in Arteta in particular seem to have an issue with how quickly VAR decided it was handball. It took me one look. I was sitting next to Simon Collins from the Standard. We got one replay and I was like, well, that's handball. It's being ruled out. It was obvious from the first viewing. It didn't need all of the extra viewings to double, triple, quadruple check that it was handball. It didn't need it. It really, really didn't need it. And it sucks that it got ruled out because it would have been a really, really big boost to us and a really big boost to the momentum. And we still could have won it towards the end. Merino hit the posts. Trossard had that chance as well from the follow-up that was saved. There were some other opportunities in the game. Like, there's no doubt that what team deserved to win the match. And obviously Arsenal deserved to win the game and created the better chances in the match by far. And it's just very frustrating, of course, that once again is another game where the fortune just disappears. And isn't it funny how 2 games against Aston Villa in 2 seasons, a goal has been ruled out in the final seconds because it's touched Havertz on the hand? Like, the narrative there is astonishing. Just on some individual performances, Odegaard was not good enough at all. Really, yesterday, he was involved in a lot of what we did, but it wasn't that Odegaard we've seen in these past couple of weeks. I honestly think it's fatigue. You know, the injury that he suffered, the illness that he's been through, to then have to be playing this number of games. If we had Winery available to us, if we had Winery available to us, then I think that he would have been given more of a rest, but he's not being able to do that because we just have so little depth in that position, unfortunately. Havertz may have been able to rotate in for him if we had another forward, but Jesus is currently injured at the moment as well. Odegaard's just that was not. He was really, really good for me in the last 2 games, but this game, it was back to the Odegaard we saw before the last 2 fixtures. It was the Odegaard that we saw in some of the disappointing performances at the beginning of the month, back from that illness. And it wasn't a very good performance at all from Odegaard. Declan Rice he's our best midfielder by a country mile. Every single element of Declan Rice's game continues to be so consistent. So incredibly consistent. The deliveries from his set pieces, the tackles, the forward progression, the passes, the movement, the driving progression of on the ball play. He's our best midfielder by absolute country mile. And he's playing, he was playing that 6th position for the predominance of the game as well. And it shows that 6th role remains an area where I think that we'll still get huge performances out of him. And I don't know why I've not included a slide for Gabriel here. I should have done. Gabriel also deserves immense praise in this game. Gabriel was really, really good too. But the player that I want to give the final word to continues to be this guy, Myles Lewis-Skelly. I just can't. I keep failing to come up with more and more and more compliments for Myles Lewis-Skelly. What he's producing at such, not just a young age, but such an early stage of his first few appearances in an Arsenal shirt is I'm trying to think of an 18-year-old, because Saka, when he burst onto the scene, was obviously playing left back, which isn't his position. Left back's not necessarily Myles Lewis-Skelly's position either, but it seems Arteta sees him as this role, and I can see why. It makes perfect sense, and credit to Arteta for bringing MLS into the side when he didn't have to. He had other left backs available to him, and he's still given him these moments and given him these opportunities, and he's taken them by the scruff of the neck and ran with them. Myles Lewis-Skelly was unplayable nearly, and has been very, 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 very good indeed. So where does it leave us? Well, of course, it leaves our title hopes again taking something of a dent. We've been in this place before, and then all of a sudden Liverpool have drawn us back in with some of their results, of course, on a day where they scored in the last couple of minutes at Brentford. Very unfortunate. Of course, the game went the way it did in the end. They had a huge number of shots. I think it was something like 37, 38 shots Liverpool managed to have. at Brentford. Not particularly great in terms of their accuracy by any stretch of the imagination, but when it mattered at the end, that's what happened. 37 shots, yes. 8 on target. I think half of those shots on target came in the last 5 to 6 minutes of the game. And it would have been a Premier League record had they have not have scored with the number of shots they ended up taking on the day, Liverpool. But it does mean, of course, that the table looks like this. Liverpool 6 points ahead of Arsenal with a game in hand. Of course, that game in hand is away at Everton. Arsenal have now got a Champions League game against Dinamo Zagreb where they're going to have to rotate some players for that game. I think it's all very obvious. The game against Wolves is of more importance, and we need to rotate and give some players some rest. But we've got 3 days again now until that game. I sincerely hope that we start seeing some movement in the transfer market once again between now and then, to give us and give the team more of an opportunity to rest and to get some more numbers through the doors as well. Ben White, Ranieri, Calafiori, Saliba, all out injured at the moment, hopefully aren't too far away in terms of coming back. So their returns will obviously boost the squad and the options that we've got. And then it's Wolves at the weekend as well. In terms of teams that have still got to play, there are today, just having a quick look at the fixtures. Today we've got Chelsea against Wolves is on Monday. We've got Forest against Southampton in the table. Could go on level on points, of course, again with Arsenal if they win that game. And they would need a hell of a lot of goals to go above us, but they could go level on points with a win there. But Chelsea, of course, have got their game against Wolves. Should they win their game, they'll be 4 points behind Arsenal. Newcastle beaten humbly by Bournemouth, and now could see themselves drop out of the top 4 if Chelsea win their game. So it shows you, a team that have won however many games in a row can quickly see their fortunes change quite a lot. Right, let's go to part 2 and tackle some of your comments for however long I can stomach them right after this. Gooner Jones says 42% of the polls says the handball wasn't clear and obvious, so VAR should not have got involved. Who are you guys kidding? Honestly, who are you? I think some of you just voted no for the bans, to be honest. I really do. There's no way that 40% of you genuinely think that that goal should stand. There's no way on earth. And if it was the other way around, I guarantee you, if we were running a poll that said, should that be given as handball, there'd be no way that many of you would think that it's not handball. There's no way that many, if it was the other way. If the shoe was on the other foot, there's no chance we'd see the vote that high whatsoever. You guys are mad. Absolutely mad. Patrick says, Tom, I don't understand why you're calling for more transfers investment in this January window. The current squad size and players are all his choices after... They're all his choices, aren't they, Patrick? Yeah, despite the fact that he wanted so many players that we've been linked to. And we haven't sadly got them. All of the players we've got and all the players we haven't got are his choices, aren't they? It's also his choice that we've lost Saka for however many months. It's his choice that Ben White's knee has needed that procedure. It's his choice that we've lost Saliba for such an important game. It's his choice that we have lost our 2 summer signings for so much of this cam. It's so much his choice. I reckon he went in with a little vial in a petri dish. I reckon he held that petri dish of illness, took it into that squad, and it was his choice to just drop it on the floor and unleash an infection amongst us. It was his choice that on international duty, Odegaard's ankle was horribly and rudely bent in a direction it should never be bent. It is his choice. All of those misfortunes. It was his choice that Declan Rice was sent off for a decision that was never, ever going to be seen again. It was his choice that everything that's gone wrong this season has been his fault. His choice. Patrick, mate, you've got me, sir. You've got me. What more could I say? It's all his choice. It's all on him. It's everything that's happened. It's his choice that what in Rafinha didn't happen. It's his choice that wanting Benjamin Sesko this summer didn't happen. It's his choice that Nico Williams didn't want to arrive. Allegedly, says Brad. Oh dear. Oh dear. Harish says, I really think this is on the sporting director. It's an absolute shame that we are into 20 days of an important transfer window and we don't have a new sporting director yet. Any news? No. And as I've mentioned before, it's not going to be something, because the likelihood is that the sporting directors that they want are in positions and are likely going to have to wait until the end of the season to get a resolution on that, because the best potential options for the job are probably already in jobs right now, is the reality of that. Nasir says, how are you going to sign a player? We don't even have a sporting... Yes, I mean, we do. We have an interim sporting director at the moment. Jason Ato, of course, is in that role, and he's working behind the scenes to try and get some stuff. Jasper says, what do you think about Chris Kavanagh not booking Foden for the same thing as Rice? He booked Lallana for kicking Foden. I mean, yeah, Chris Kavanagh's a disgrace. James says, on the whole, I think we played well. Just a defensive error by Merino and a terrible defensive lapse by Partey, who I never want to see it right back again. I never want to see Partey right back, for the record. I just don't really see the glaringly obvious alternative when we've seen the likes of Kivior in his last two starts make two goal conceding errors. I've seen people suggest that we should have played Tierney at right back and thinking that's somehow the answer to all of our problems. It's mad to me. It's absolutely mad to me. Jonas says, hi, Tom. According to the Daily Star, Arteta has been given the green light to go for Gyökeres. What are your thoughts? I personally don't buy it. I'll believe it when I see it, Jonas. Not the report, the transfer. Gonna get ya says, Sky commentators are so biased. I guess that is one of the benefits I've got right now, is I don't have to listen to Gary Neville when I'm in the press box. I don't have to listen to any commentary. It is a bit of a blessing, that, I guess. Maximia says, Tom, who chose to go into the grueling season with a skeleton squad? We reached the stage where we had one sub, two in the 80th minute, and it was washed out, scraping the barrel. Again, Arsenal's squad being as thin as it was, there's big reasons and big explanations as to why what happened in the summer happened in the summer. We all know about the restrictions that we faced regarding UEFA. We all know that we had to make money this summer. We had to get better money for our players. And it's almost like people think that Smith Rowe and Nelson and Nketiah are somehow going to turn Arsenal into a side that are higher than the position they are, which, by the way, would be first. It's the only higher position Arsenal could occupy in the league, is first place in the league. And I personally am not buying it. I'm not buying that Smith Rowe and Nketiah and Nelson and Vieira are suddenly players that, if they were here, we'd be winning significantly more points. We had to get those players through the door. We had to make good money for them, and we did. Now, we've brought some players in, and we've lost those players. I don't think it's a skeleton squad. I don't think it's fair to call it a skeleton squad at all. I think if you look at the number of players that we've got in this team, got Raya and Neto, 2, Saliba 3, Tierney 4, White 5, Gabriel 6, Timber 7, Kivior 8, Zinchenko 9, Tomiyasu 10, Calafiori 12, Partey 13, Odegaard 14, Jorginho 15, Rice 16, Merino 17, Saka 18, Jesus 19, Martinelli 20, Trossard 21, Havertz 22, Sterling 23. Now, we know that Tomiyasu, of course, you can say 22 and a half, because Tomiyasu, his fitness availability has been horrendously poor. And Tierney, of course, was injured at the start of the season, probably would have left at this point. So let's be fair and call it 22, 21 and a half, 22. So a skeleton squad, if you've got 21 players out of a potential 25, and then you've got players like Waneri and Myles Lewis-Skelly, who I've not mentioned here, have broken into the first team setup as well. So the idea of accurately describing this squad as a skeleton squad, you can only add 2 more players to what I've mentioned, not including Tierney and Tomiyasu, by the way. You can only add 2 more. So skeleton squad, Maximius, sadly, mate, that doesn't make any sense. If we had like 18, 19, 20 available players to us, no problem. Skeleton squad. But when you got 23, not including Tomiyasu and Tierney, I'm not sure it's fair to call it a skeleton squad at all. Mohamed Basha says, Tom, a thin squad for the 3rd year is unforgivable. Come on, man. Arteta himself said it's... I mean, it's a thin squad in terms of the level. You know, that's the difference. I think when he's talking about a thin squad, he's talking about the level of the players at the top end of this team. the gap of our starting players to those of depth positions. That's where that big gap exists. But the reality is that the idea of being able to add the depth that we need to get to a place where City's squad is at. And by the way, what City have done this season is far more unforgivable in terms of their form than Arsenal's. They've lost one key player this season, which is Rodri. One big player has been lost. Arsenal have lost a hatful of key starters during key periods of this season and are performing to a higher level of City, who are without one of their key players. Liverpool have had Salah and their best stars, Van Dijk, available to them for all of this season. They've lost Alisson, but they've got a very decent backup goalkeeper, of course, which is probably the less influential position on the pitch, of course, anyway. So the idea that when we look at this squad and why the depth is not where it needs to be, the idea is where the depth is where it isn't where it needs to be is very easy to explain. It's because simply in terms of spending, Arsenal haven't spent as much as Liverpool and Manchester City in the same amount of time. The squads that have been built since Arteta has come into the team that had to be ripped up is where it is right now. And Arsenal need to spend more, and Arteta needs to be backed more, and he needs to be given more money to spend more in the market. And I sincerely hope that happens during this January window. It's inexcusable for it to not happen this January window. We have to try and find those players. But what I will not do is fall into the trap that some people are falling into, which is saying that we just need to bring in anybody. Because that doesn't solve our problem. Because as we have shown, this isn't a skeleton squad. Because we have numbers. It's the level of quality from that starting 11 down that needs to be addressed. Not the numbers. The numbers are as skeleton as they are now because of the ridiculous number of injuries that we are suffering. That's why it feels as thin as it does right now, because of the number of injuries that we've suffered. But it's quality that we need to have those conversations about. So when people say we need to bring in just anybody, you're part of the problem. You're not solving any of these issues at all. Just bringing in anybody, because as soon as the starting players come back into the squad and take back their starting positions, the players then you've brought in that are just bodies to make up the numbers are just going to be sitting on the bench. Maximus says, I know I can't convince you, Tom, fair enough, but I see too many holes in the squad since 2022 have been lacking a few important players the season upon season. And that's fine, but season upon season, Maximus, we're adding players to the team. Season upon season, we keep spending money. We're breaking records in spending. Arsenal still spent 100 million on players in the summer, which is more than double of what Man City and Liverpool did combined during that summer window. Yes, there's holes, but there's holes because the idea that Arsenal could rip up a squad from scratch in the summer of 2020 and be in a position where we're competing for a title within 3 seasons and then successively in the next 3 seasons after that, I'm sorry, but it's unrealistic to have that. It's not a case of you can't convince me. If someone puts forward the evidence, if someone gives me the evidence, I'm more than happy to listen to it. I don't mind changing my mind. There's no point having a mind if you don't change it. But when I list through to you, Maximius, the number of players that we have at the start of the season, which is 25, 23 senior players, plus Winery, plus Myles Lewis-Skelly, you can only have a 25-man squad. Your argument of a skeleton squad, you have to hold your hands up there and say, fair enough. It's not a skeleton squad, but it's thin in terms of competitive starting quality. That is the accurate way of putting it. That's the accurate way of describing the team. Because what we have suffered this season, on top of, sadly, what we've been able to do in the market, those two things have combined, lead us to where we are now. And it's not about Arteta choosing to do this, by the way. It's not a case of choosing not to add quality players. We need to go out and find them. They need to be available. They need to be gettable. They need to be accessible. It's all well and good saying, just activate Nico Williams' 50 million euro or 60 million euro, release clause. But then you've got to break your wage structure and pay him more than 300 grand a week to bring him in. STR says, are you even listening to yourself? It was the manager's choice to have a small squad. This, again, are people choosing to be cognitively dissonant with this? This small squad thing. I've just read you the numbers. You can have a 25-man squad. We have 25 players that have operated in the senior squad this season. What is this small squad thing? Where is this coming from? It's just counting. It's not an opinion. It's just counting. It looks very thin now when we've lost and we've got 7 players currently out injured. Yes, it's a smaller squad. But frankly, the injuries that we've suffered are ridiculous. You cannot have Saka and Saliba and Ben White and such key figures of this group missing through injury and expect there not to be an impact on how thick the squad looks. Impossible. Impossible to have. Patrick says, I think that Arteta likes working with smaller squads. If we weren't struggling financially, then why would we be happy with Smith and Nelson leaving? Because they've asked to leave, Patrick. That's an easy answer. They asked to go. And the opportunities came up for them to go. So it happened. Lee says, like Joe Root, the captaincy needs to be taken off. Oh, goodness me, Lee. Joe says, if we seem Saliba's out for a long term as well. Now, hopefully it's not. From what Arteta was saying, it doesn't sound too bad. So hopefully Saliba's not out for a long time. When he was asked about, is he worried? And he said, of course I'm worried. I think that was more because, of course I'm worried. I'm without one of my best players in my team. So yeah, we hope he's back. Of course he's worried. But I don't think it should be too long from what we've been described. I think it's a minor hamstring kind of tightness or a minor hamstring strain. So hopefully not too bad. But Joe says, wouldn't it be better to decide to ride out the season without expectations and take the pressure off? No, not at all. We're still in the League Cup. I know it's a very difficult game to go to Newcastle and get a result, but they've just been beaten 4-1. Arsenal repeat Bournemouth scoreline at St James's Park, and you're into the final. Shows you how doable it is. So let's not pretend that it's not doable. The Champions League is still there for us as well. A really good position. And so that's what's obviously really important for us. Maxime says, Tom, Saka and Saliba's injury has to be credited to the being overworked. The minutes that Saliba have played in the entirety of 2024, this was a disaster waiting to happen. Same with Saka. Yeah, go and look at Van Dijk and Salah's minutes, Maximius, and tell me, when they're available, if they start all their games. Just tell me. Do they start all their games? Do those best players start all their games? Did Rodri start all of his games for Manchester City when he's available? When he's not suspended. It just is. That's the reality. That's just football. This idea that you're going to be able to escape injuries or that you should give them less minutes or not start them in every single Premier League game just because the chance of injury may happen. It's not about looking at us. It's about looking at the authority. It's about looking at how many games these players are being expected to play. That's the reality. That's the reality. Is that it's on those making the decisions about how many games these players have to play. Because at this level, when you've got those players and you've got them and you're the best in your team, you're going to play them. Because if you don't play them and you don't win, fingers are going to start to be pointed. Why didn't you play Saka? You couldn't afford to drop Saka. We needed to win this game. Why didn't you play him? Salah starts when he's fit and available. Rodri starts when he's fit and available. Joey says, not bashing you, Tom, just saying Salah has been out last season. Salah went to the African Cup of Nations last season, got injured, came back, and whenever he was fit enough to play, he played. And eventually Liverpool trailed off as a result of that injury that he suffered during the AFCON, which didn't get resolved until the summer fully. And so it wasn't about resting him in the second half of the season after he came back from the African Cup of Nations. He got injured at the African Cup of Nations. He missed games against Chelsea, Arsenal, Burnley, was rushed back for their game against Brentford, got injured in that game against Brentford again because he was rushed back too quickly, missed the game against Luton and Forest, came back off the bench as they drew with Manchester City, started the next game and the next game and the next game and the next game, then had some more fitness issues and was basically in the last kind of 6 games of the season, I think he started 4 of the last 6, as Liverpool were chasing a title because he wasn't fit. So this idea that Salah's been out last season, yeah, but he wasn't rested. When Salah wasn't fit, up until the African Cup of Nations, Salah started every Premier League game. Every single Premier League game up until the AFCON, he started. So this idea that it's on Arteta because he's played Saka too much, it's just not an example. It's not an example at all. Because when you are playing in for the title, you play your best players. yes, injuries are going to happen. Injuries are going to happen, and sadly, it's a situation where when they happen, there is a level of acceptance that you're going to have a drop in quality because these players are irreplaceable. Man City with Rodri, Salah with Liverpool. When you lose these players, there's a drop. It's just part and parcel of the game, unfortunately, because it doesn't matter what you do in the market. You're never going to bring in competition that's going to be as good as Saka. You're never going to bring in a player as good as Rodri. You're never going to bring in a player as good as Mohamed Salah when they're not there. And so you're naturally going to suffer as a result. And after Salah's injury at the AFCON, eventually his drop of performances and the level and the absences affected Liverpool to the point where they fell out of the title race last season. This season, Rodri's injury has been catastrophic for Manchester City. So I'm sorry that it's so easily explainable, but it is. It just is. STR says, lol, 5 years for a Carabao. Don't compare the two, please. I mean, we won an FA Cup, mate. So maybe you want to get your Arsenal knowledge right before you start making criticisms. King Balaja says there was options in the transfer market to attack and we weren't brave enough to go for them. Every transfer. Who would that be for you? Who would that be for you, King? Who are the options that are available in the transfer market that we were not brave enough to go for? And brave is an interesting word. Why didn't Liverpool sign those players? Why didn't Manchester City sign those players in that market? Who was it that we weren't brave enough, King, to go for in that market? Spy says, Tom, is the rule the ball can't touch the hand, or is it that it can't be deliberate? It's that it can't touch the hand. It's nothing to do with how deliberate it is. The rule is it can't touch the hand before it goes in the net. And as we can all see, whether you think it touches his stomach or not, which I personally don't, no matter what, it does touch his arm before it goes in the net. So that's the rule. That's why it's handball. Mr. Thugi says top players play when they are fit, although not sure if Saka has to start against Bolton. The Bolton one is obviously something I brought up myself, but I've been told that he was injured prior to that Bolton game and needed to play that Bolton game to get back to fitness, is what I've been. When I complained about him starting the Bolton game, I was told that he had to play that game because he had to get himself up to fitness again after suffering an injury. Maxim says, Tom, you are indirectly agreeing with what I'm saying. I'm definitely not, mate. I'm not agreeing that we have a skeleton squad at all. I don't really understand how on earth I've agreed with you that we've got a skeleton squad. It's impossible to suggest we've got a skeleton squad when we go into a season with a 25-man squad and you're allowed 25 players. Your mistake is that we're not talking about here the numbers, which is what you have done by describing it as a skeleton squad. We're talking about the level of quality from the starting 11 down. That's the area that needs to be addressed. And it's very difficult, of course, to do that, especially with positions like Saka's as well. But he continues by saying, my question is, wasn't there a lesson for us to learn from those teams playing Van Dijk, Salah, Rodri? No, because those teams have won trophies, mate. Those teams have won leagues. Those teams have won Champions Leagues by playing those players. They've won trophies by doing what they've done. As a result, those players, yes, have been burnt out. Those players have, yes, got injuries. But they've won the trophies. It was worth the risk for them. So no, there isn't a lesson there, because the lesson is, look what they're doing, look what they're winning. We should do that too. So when your best players are available, you play them. It's as simple as that. Chris says, Arteta got given the job too soon. Yes, definitely, too soon. Horrendous job. Took Arsenal from 11th to back-to-back title races. Too soon. Amira says, Liverpool won the league with 99 points, but only got 69 points the next season due to an injury crisis. Whatever you think about injuries, they will inevitably affect a team one way or another. Still challenging in the Premier League and the Champions League. G said 4 says Liverpool still have 5 adequate forwards good enough to start. I don't see why we can't get the quality in regardless of the start. I mean, they have 5 good forward players. They have Salah, Jota, Gakpo, Diaz, Nunez. Nunez is a bit of a question. Is he worth 100 million? No, he scored 2 goals yesterday. Not so sure. But Adequate was the word that G4 used. If we're talking about adequate forwards, we have Saka, who is brilliant. Martinelli, Trossard, Havertz, Jesus are other 4 attacking players. And then you got Sterling, who is nowhere near adequate. Martinelli definitely is. Trossard definitely is. In my opinion, Havertz definitely is. And then you've got, who am I forgetting? Jesus. And the thing about Jesus is that, if we're being honest, he's not been good enough. Jesus has not been good enough. When he scored that goal against Palace, I think that was his first goal since, or the one he scored against Preston was his first goal since January. His first league goal against Palace was his first one again since January. It's really, it's obvious that we need that step up. But defensively, Saliba, Gabriel, Timber, Raya, Rice, Partey, that's where obviously Arsenal's strength is over Liverpool. Arsenal's defensive strength over Liverpool obviously is the difference in the last 2 to 3 seasons, 2.5 seasons. That's where Arsenal's strength has been over them. I'm not sitting here, and I don't want you to be mistaken. I'm not sitting here and saying we don't need to add. That's not what I'm saying. And if you think that I am, please reconsider your position on what you've listened to, because that's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying. I'd love Arsenal to go into the market and add a top-level striker. And in my opinion, in the next 6 months, either here or in the summer, most likely the summer, we have to do that. And if we don't do that, you have to ask the question, what's the point? Because you're going up against sides that aren't slowing down. Man City have just spent a humongous sum of money on a player that has not earned that transfer fee in Omar Marmoush ultimately. He may earn it now, moving, but that's the level of money that they're paying for a player that is a risk. It's a big, big question. We have to do something. We have to go into the market and invest. We have to improve the options of this squad. Absolutely have to go and improve that. So let's wait and see. Hopefully it does. Mitch says, hi, Tom. Do you think a player like Morata can stop? No, come on. I don't like using this phrase, but people got to raise their standards, Mitch. You've got to raise the standard in terms of players that we're looking at. We don't need bodies. We don't need players that are just going to do a job. We need proper quality. We need quality. Don't fall into that trap. I'm disappointed with Sterling as well. And he is a body. It was a panic buy on deadline day to get him on loan. Mohammed says, you're too emotional today to be as reasonable as we know. I don't know what I've said that's unreasonable, Mohammed. I really don't. I don't know what on earth you think I've said that's unreasonable. I've said it's not handball because it's not. Sorry. I've said, let's do that again. I've said, maybe I am too emotional. It is handball because it is handball. We don't have a skeleton squad. We don't. We have 25 players, of which 7 are currently injured, which is a big, big problem. I've said that the best players play the majority, if not all, of the games they are available for. And as a result, teams like City and Liverpool have seen those players injured, and that's now affected Arsenal this season. I've said we absolutely have to go into the market and add a significant level of quality to improve the options available this and into next season. So I don't know what I've said that's incredibly unreasonable. But please do let me know. Owen says, people just want you to be angry and rant. I love a rant. You know me. I love a rant. I managed to rant and stay objective. It's a great skill. But I don't know what I've said that's unreasonable. I really don't. Richard says, I love Timber, but is he tall enough to play centre-half for us? Should we look at signing taller centre-backs? I mean, let's be honest. It's not to do. It wasn't to do with the height of our defenders while we didn't win yesterday. It's to do with just the presence of thought of individual players, Partey in particular, as to why we didn't. Partey is the biggest reason we didn't win yesterday. I think we all know that. But yeah, that's just where we are. Hi, Sophie says, you emotional and unreasonable wreck you. I'm still waiting to be told what's so unreasonable about what I've said. I'm still waiting for it. Jasper says the forward players are risks. They're 60 to 70 million. We won't take a risk on that. again, it kind of shows, doesn't it? It shows you the state of the market in a way that a 60 to 70 million pound player that we're signing is a risk. We spent 42 million pounds on Mesut Ozil back in the day. Like, I know the transfer window's changed, but it's mad that we're spending like 70 millions on players and we're calling them risks. Mammoth says, Tom, you are too emotional to be as reasonable as we know you to be, but it's okay. We love you, man. Oh, and Skeleton Squad. You still haven't told me what I've been unreasonable about, mate. I'm still waiting. I'm really curious what you think. I'm genuinely curious. Maxime says, Tom, do you think there is any truth to the news about Osimhen? I've heard nothing, mate. There might be, but I've heard nothing. Dave says, TC, Victor Osimhen has been linked overnight. Do you think it's achievable? You know my thoughts on Osimhen. I personally wouldn't do that deal. However, if he was to sign, I sincerely hope that he proves me wrong. I would want nothing more than for him to go on an absolute scoring spree and make me look like a complete fool. I'd love for that to happen. I'd love for that to happen if that was the case. I can't see it, and I can't really necessarily at this point agree with that idea because I just think I'd rather a Sesko. I'd rather a Gyökeres. I'd rather that than Osimhen. I'd rather sign a Sesko than an Osimhen, personally. From what I've watched of Osimhen, the age, the potential wages as well, and the quality, the goal scoring, the style, the system that he fits into, I think I just prefer Sesko. I prefer Gyökeres. I just think there's more guarantees about his goal scoring. I think the off-field stuff is a little concerning as to why he's gone Galatasaray and why no elite club came in for him as well. Owen says, you're getting old when you're complaining about inflation in football transfer markets. I remember Bob Geldof went for 50p to Football Vale. GZ4 says, Tom, how solid is the Nipan rumours? Very solid. Arsenal are interested in him, and we'll have to wait and see if there's any updates on that. He's not a player that's going to transform Arsenal season this year, but he's a very exciting young player. Gabby says, why do some people have problems with showing emotion? I was really gutted after yesterday's game. I remember I was walking out the stadium with James Benn just going like this, just rubbing my face. so frustrated, that we dropped points there because it was a chance. Like beating, I was saying before the game, like beating Aston Villa is a really, really big challenge. Like they're a very good team. Most people suggest that Unai Emery is the second best manager in this league, and they've dropped off a bit this season. They've still got a very, very good side, very, very good players in it, and they've got a very good record against us. So beating that was going to be no mean feat, and we very, very nearly did. The discourse around the game comes from the result rather than the performance, because the performance deserved the win. I think that's very obvious. Like, we deserved to win yesterday's game. There's no doubt about that. 2 defensive errors have cost us. We limited them in terms of, major chances. Martin had that one in the first half that Raya saved. Thomas Partey decided to give a late Christmas present to Ollie Watkins with that throw-in. But overall, besides the Manchester United-like counter-attacks at the end of the game when we're chasing that victory, we do know that we'd win that game. And, if we had Saka and Saliba available to us, Ben White perhaps as well, maybe less so Ben White, but certainly if we had Saka and Saliba in that team yesterday, I have absolutely no doubt that we win that game. Absolutely no doubt that we win that game. So I'm annoyed about the result more than I am annoyed about the performance. That's where I'm at, and that probably needs to give us some perspective, doesn't it? I think that probably needs to give us some grounded reality about where we're at. Because if it was a case of like we were beaten like we were last season, and not even like last season, I think last season's game Trossard should have scored, and we should have gone in at halftime 1-0, and that game probably ends very differently. And who knows, maybe we go on and win the league, but I really don't. Sophie says, we beat ourselves. Players don't believe. I don't agree with that, Sophie. You tell me that when Trossard had that strike at the end and whipped the crowd up and was Gabriel going into the corner, whipping. That's the one thing I think is wrong about anyone suggesting the players don't believe. These players believe in what we're doing. These players are... I'm sorry, but you can't, with the number of injuries that we've got and how thin the group currently available to us is, that effectively the same players are playing the same games every 3 days for the past however many weeks, and we still sit second We're still putting in performances of dominance. We're still absolutely tonking the sides in terms of chances compared, in terms of XG or whatever. There's no way that they can be accused of not believing. I don't agree with that at all, because the performances do not align with that viewpoint. I get the idea of fatigue, and I get the idea of, and I was listening to your chat the other day, Rebecca Lowe, and understand the point that she makes when it's like you've got kind of this this wave of momentum. You compete for a title that no one expects you to. You carry that wave into the following season, but this season there's an expectation that Arsenal have to go and win the league. And yes, losing players like Saka mentally deflate us. Sure, I don't disagree with that. But I think to accuse the players of not believing when I've watched the performances that I've watched over the last few weeks, I can't get on board with that. BX Gunner says players do lose faith in managers. Ideas get old. Yeah, but there's absolutely no evidence based upon what we're seeing week in, week out, game by game, that these players are losing faith in the manager. If they were losing the faith in the manager, we wouldn't be dominating sides despite being as tired as we are. We wouldn't be battering teams and deserving to win despite the fact that we've lost so many key players. There is no evidence that this team has lost faith in its manager. Zero. If you were actually old enough to remember the end of the Unai Emery tenure or the end of the Arsene Wenger tenure, and I mean old enough that you genuinely can consciously think back to how our performances were against sides like Vitoria, for instance, that was a team that no longer believed in a manager. They were performances that wanted something new. There's been nothing about the performances in these recent weeks at all to me. There's only one game I was genuinely frustrated about how we performed this season, and that was that Newcastle away game. That Newcastle away game was one of our games of the season where we just didn't show up at all. It was like Fulham away in the previous season. But when you look back over the performances of the team this season, there's no way this team can be accused of either not believing in their manager or not having faith in their ideas. The game against Spurs, how we completely dominated Manchester United, just couldn't score our chances. You know, we deserved more from that Newcastle home game in the League Cup. We should have scored the chances that we created for ourselves. And they kept firing into the final minutes as well. They kept on plugging away, trying to create opportunities despite being 2-0 down, knowing it was only half time in the tie. The Brighton game is gutting because you have a midfield that's made up of Merino and Rice and Partey, because you have no depth. Was Jorginho in that? I think Jorginho was there as well. Jorginho, Rice and Merino, I think, was the midfield. Despite having so little attacking availability. The only reason we lost that game is because Brighton were gift-wrapped a penalty that was never a penalty. We go to Brentford, one of the hardest sides to go to in the league, go 1-0 down after 12 minutes and come back to win 3-1. I'm sorry, but there's just zero evidence to suggest that these players have down tools or do not believe in what we're seeing. They clearly believe, because the same 11 plus 1 or 2 have come out every 3 to 4 days and have continued to dominate teams despite the challenges on offer, despite the challenges on show. They keep coming out and they keep plugging away and they keep creating chance after chance after chance, and they keep deserving more than they're getting. So that for me is where we're at. Ellen says, how come people say we deserve more yet game after game we don't get it? Because we keep creating so much. We keep being the better side. We keep being the more dominant team. We keep turning up with these performances. The evidence is so blatant and clear to us. I think people are focusing on the actual scoreline more than they're focusing on what we have seen in the game. And certainly I got so angered and frustrated at full time by the result, but I wasn't frustrated by the performance other than the individual errors defensively that led to those goals. I've not been angry at our performances besides our finishing. That's the element. And, and yesterday it was the individual defensive errors. But the performances have deserved more than we've got. And yeah, Mario, the scorelines are more important. Absolutely. When you look at the table, the scorelines are more important in terms of where you finish. But when you're having a bigger, wider, broader conversation about the long term and decision makings with managers and so on and so forth, you don't change coaches based upon what we're seeing. Man United changed Ten Hag because their players are down tools and they were getting bossed by teams in the bottom half of the table. to a degree, they still are in sometimes. Southampton should have beaten them the other day. These aren't performances that we're seeing of players that no longer believe. Some of our horrible supporters, sadly, want them to do that, want them to down tools. There are people within this fan base that genuinely want them to stop believing in the manager and want them to even lose games. But you're all better than that. So I know I don't need to worry about that. Anyway, we're going to bring the show to a close. Thank you so much for listening. Go enjoy your Sunday. Please do. And as always, when we don't win, I like to end with and start and end with the same messages as usual. Please look after yourselves. Look after your mental health. Make sure you've got interest outside of football. This is just a game. I always say those words. I used to hate it when people said those words to me when I was a youngster. It's like, it's not just a game, it's life. It's not. It is just a game. So there's way more important things to worry about, way more important things to enjoy. Spend time with friends, spend time with family, go do different things that aren't related to football. Please, please, please look after yourselves, look after your mental health. And I look forward to joining you tomorrow morning and getting ready to look ahead to another game and hopefully some positive transfer news. Have a fantastic day. Stay safe, stay well, stay happy and respectful. And as always, up the Arsenal.